We are in Antwerp. I made hundreds of interviews, but I actually never asked, what do you think if there will be some elephants out there and eating the grass? Would you be surprised?
Well, maybe 1 year ago or 2 years ago I would have been very surprised, although in Antwerp of course we have a zoo, and in this zoo there are elephants. So especially where we are now here at Literatuur Flanders, it's not so far from the zoo. One could think they have escaped. But since I, in my last novel, actually sent 20,000 elephants to Berlin, I wouldn't be surprised. Actually, I would probably be pleased to see 2 elephants in the garden here.
And if I ask, I don't know, monkeys?
Yeah, monkeys are something else. I mean, we're very used to not seeing big wildlife in European cities, but I travel a lot, and outside Europe it's very normal to see monkeys in the city. Just like here you see seagulls or maybe rats some time of the day. So that we are no longer used to seeing bigger wildlife in the European cities has something to do with the way we live, the way we treat nature. We separate nature and human living areas, and therefore there are not so many animals anymore in the cities. Although maybe, I think in Brussels and also here, you can run into a fox in the middle of the night.
Yes, I have one in the garden actually. But it's not my fox. So you wrote this book, the geschenk, the gift, and well, it contains some elephants, of course, but I think it's more about, well, you can say it, because I think it's talking about many interesting things, talking about, first of all, politics, okay, how to handle these many elephants just going marching on the street, and they probably step on cars and make huge problems in the city. So first of all, this kind of organizational things, but also in a wider sense that, okay, do we allow or do we advise to live with elephants in Europe, especially in Berlin? And of course in the other layers there are more personal relations questions. So what is this book really about?
That's a good question. I already for a long time I wanted to write a book actually about right-wing populism and the reaction of, let's say, the political parties in the political middle, how they react to it, if they are still able to govern or if they try to just handle this pressure coming from the right side. I was also thinking about the international or intercontinental relationships between the political north and the political south, the global south, the way that we still in a neo-colonial way decide how African countries have to deal with nature areas with large animals like elephants. But if I would tell it to a publisher like that, the publisher would probably say, yeah, but it's not such a sexy subject. Do you think we can sell this? And then luckily, because I believe very much in luck or in coincidence when it comes to telling stories, I stumbled on an article in a German newspaper saying that the president of Botswana wanted to give 20,000 elephants to Germany because Germany had made a law on the import of ivory much more strict because they didn't want hunting licenses to be given for elephants in Botswana. And this caused problems in Botswana because they have too many elephants. And the elephants sort of conflict with the farmers because they eat the crops and they trample the villages, and there is these problems between humans and animals. And so the president of Botswana said, yeah, you know, if you're so worried about the elephant, which is of course a wonderful animal, we'll send 20,000 elephants to Europe, but they have to live freely in Berlin. And I thought, it's a wonderful start for a story. I mean, the prime minister one morning wakes up, he opens his window, Berlin is full of elephants, elections are coming closer, right-wing populists are already doing very well in the polls, and he thinks, oh my, how shall I handle all this? And it sort of gave me a story to talk about this theme that I found important in a much more attractive and above all in a much more humorous way. And I think writing lightly and with humor about themes or problems of today's world is maybe a way to attract much more readers to think and to reflect upon these themes.
Of course, but there are many aspects you can talk about this in this topic. You can talk about Africa. Okay, how do we behave or how do we handle what's happening there, of course. And of course, with all the political things and craziness, what is coming in the in the last few years, let's say, I think it's also worth to mention, a nice topic. But after all, you said something which is very interesting for me, that you mentioned that your publisher said that, okay, let's sell this story. So why do you need to,
Well, actually, the good thing is my publisher would never say it, because at a certain point I chose a publisher. The publisher where I was publishing stopped existing. And I went to shop around and ask other publishers, could I maybe come to you? Could I maybe come to you? And one of the publishers, Querido, where I'm actually publishing now, said, to us, it doesn't matter if you sell many books or very little books. You can just tell any story you like. If you don't find it important to sell huge numbers of books, we don't find it important either. And that's the reason that I chose for this publisher, because of course, from an artistic point of view, I don't want to make a compromise. I don't want to write different books to sell more books. I find it artistically complete nonsense. On the other hand, on a topic like this, when you're talking about right-wing populism, about politics, about climate change, but because the book also talks about gender inequality, about maybe feminism, maybe you want to reach a large number of people with this story, and not only the group of people who already agrees with you. So I was looking myself for a story that I could maybe wrap this theme in, so that I would not only reach the readers who already are converted to thinking along similar lines. And I think that this way the story just functions really well.
I read this book and I think you are very much interested in the organizational stuff. Is it really intentional, or is it just what is coming out from you?
Well, I think it has to do with the absurdity, because in a way I find it absurd that the whole political system these days, and I find it at the same time absurd and tragical, and very often these two things are related, I think. The entire political system is so worried about being re-elected again after 4 years or 5 years, whatever the terms are, that they're afraid to think on longer terms. They don't look at a future further ahead. Whereas I think that the problems that we are confronted with are problems that ask us to look ahead not 4 years, but 2, 3, 4 generations ahead, and to think like, if we go on like this, if this is the political course that we follow, what will happen to my children? What will happen to my grandchildren? What will happen to their children? Will there still be a livable future for them in an economical sense, in a climatological sense, in a political sense? And so this fascinated me very much, but there is a certain absurdity to this, being so afraid not to be elected, because of course I understand what's behind it. If you're not part of the political system, you can't influence it anymore, so you want to stay part of it. But in order to stay part of it, you're willing to sacrifice so many things that you believe in, that in the end all these middle parties are doing precisely the same in measures that they're taking or in laws that they're enforcing as these right-wing parties that they're trying to keep away from power. And then I always have to think of my previous book, which is about trophy hunting. And there, at a certain point, one of the characters says to the hunter, yeah, you can tell me all these ethical things, but for the animal, it doesn't matter if it is killed by the hunter or by the poacher. And I think the same is true for the political story and for the citizens. For citizens, or for people who are targeted by a certain law or a certain policy, it doesn't matter if it is taken by the right-wing populists or by another party. It's the effect and the consequences stay the same. So all these things I could explore, but in a light tone, because it's so idiotic if you have a closer look at it, how everybody tries to shift responsibility, how they try to, these elephants are here, we don't know what to do with them, maybe we have to give them a positive image so that we think that they're a nice thing to have. And you have all these small mechanisms, and I like to look at power structures in that way.
Yes, of course, absurdity is part of our life anyway. I mean, in Belgium, hundreds of examples.
In Belgium, it would be complicated. I mean, who would have to take care of these elephants? Would it be a federal problem, a Flemish problem, a Wallonian problem? Could we shift them to Wallonia, where there is less dense population and maybe more room? I mean, I can think of lots of political consequences here as well.
And needless to say, if these elephants are going too fast and then speed cameras just checking, someone have to pay some price.
The funny thing about elephants is also, I mean, of course they're a metaphor. The whole story is a parable-like metaphor for other things. But an elephant is also a very realistic thing. It's huge, it's big, it's heavy, it needs water, it needs lots of food, and a lot of this food leaves the elephant on the other end in an undigested way, causing problems that we know from all the agricultural discussions in Europe, but in a much bigger quantity. So actually I just had fun with these big animals.
You wrote another one, which is called the Trofee.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it is really talking about Africa, I guess. But is it? I'm not sure after all what you said, because it's also kind of absurdity what is happening here. Because the story is that there is one hunter. He wants to shut all the 5 big monsters, let's say, or big animals in Africa, and he pays for that, and he expects that he could do that like smoothly. Like you go to the shop and, oh, I really want this. No, I don't want the apple. I want the peach juice, for example, things like that. And then he realizes that. But there might be some problems, because there are, let's say, people in the gray area who also hunting, but without, of course, paying anything to anyone, and they can easily make problems, let's say. I'm not even sure that this is really a story about the hunter. This might be a metaphor for like Europe, because telling in the book so much about that.
It's nice that you say it, because I thought when I started to write this that it would be a story about trophy hunting. I thought so for a rather long time. And actually it is not. I think hunting is what carries the story. It's like what's happening is, of course, this hunt. First this hunt on the black rhino, and then when the black rhino, when he sort of misses his opportunity there is another hunt that begins, an even darker one. And what it is really about, I think, is about white gaze and about the way that the Western world, be it the European world, be it America, because our hunter in this story is an American, the way that they still look at this African continent, and the way that they still think that it's like, he also never names the country that he's in, because he doesn't care what country he's in. He thinks Africa is like one big pleasure park that belongs to him anyway, and he can go there and hunt, and it's only there for his pleasure, and maybe there's country borders and people who live there, and maybe very different countries and cultures, but it's not his problem. He's only interested in what it is for him. So everything starts very much with this perspective of the white hunter and his very colonial view that he still has on this African continent. And he comes there with the idea, me as a Westerner, my way of living is definitely the best way of living, probably the only correct way of living. Nothing can happen to me. On top of that, I have a big gun. I am completely untouchable, and I come to this continent and I am above nature, above the people, above everything. And this whole illusion explodes in his face. And that I find very interesting. The moment that he realizes that he's not that superior at all, there is a completely different moral system there than his, which is at least as interesting, maybe functioning even better in this reality, that without the help of the indigenous people he is completely lost, and that he is not only the hunter, but if he is unlucky, he can also very quickly become the prey. And all these inversions of what the ideas that he arrived with and the reality that they collide with, I found very interesting.
Isn't it a cliche in a way that, okay, we are Europeans? I mean, personally, I never went to hunting, of course. I don't even like the idea that, okay, hunting other animals. But maybe I still would like to eat some chicken or rabbit in the evening, I don't know. So there is a kind of balance on that although I don't go to hunting, but then I might, I don't know, kill the rats, for example. I don't like rats in my house.
Well, one could think if it's a cliché, but when we go back to this idea of colonialism, we love to think on the European side in any case. I'm not so certain if all the Americans would say the same, but we would like to think colonialism is a thing of the past. We are progressive people, we are advanced, we have left this behind us, this is history. If it's not us, it is the others. I don't think that way. I don't see Africa as like one black continent. I know very well that there are different cultures, that there are these modern cities, that it's a very diverse, complex story, this whole African continent. But all these colonial clichés are and have been for so long part of our cultural tradition, of our European history, that they are still in all of us. They are in Hemingway stories, they are in Out of Africa and all sort like films with orange suns and broad landscapes. They're in all these holiday brochures of come to Kenya and you can go on a photo safari. I found out while I was writing that for me it was very easy to find these clichés again and to write them, and for the reader it is very seducing to believe them again. And therefore the reader very easily gets into the mind of Hunter White and into the way that he is looking at this continent. I was actually shocked myself, and I think many readers are also shocked about themselves at how easy it is to follow his way of thinking. And then they suddenly realize where it leads when the second hunt begins, and then think, oh God, have I been thinking this? So it's not as far from us as we would maybe like it to be.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, that kind of circumstances that I have a big gun, I paid a lot of money, and there's a rhino in front of me, then okay, what should I do? I mean, of course I will be scared, so I probably I just run away, but maybe other people say that, yeah, I paid for that, there's the big...
It starts in any case from his very Western concept that he is rich and he can, whatever he wants, he can buy it. And that's his moral structure. It's this idea that we have that everything is for sale, that even Greenland is for sale these days. So it's in a way, it's the same logic. And on the other hand, and that's something that I wanted to explore too, there is this instinct that we still have. I never shot anything, I don't hunt myself. But the German television wanted to take me shooting because of this book. And so we agreed we would go shooting not animals, because that I didn't see, but clay doves, which is these small things that they shoot into the air. And so I was there, and it already starts with you walk through Berlin at 9 o'clock in the morning with a gun in your hand. For a European, it's a very strange thing. I mean, maybe for Americans it's normal to be in the public space with a firearm, but it gave me a very strange feeling. And then you come into the shooting club, and there were only men. I was the only woman. And again, that's a bit strange. And then these things fly into the air, and the moment that you see them, there is this animal-like instinct that pops up in you that thinks, it moves and I want it, just like a cat who sees a mouse and thinks, it moves so I want it. And if you then hit it, the adrenaline goes up, and you immediately feel this, I want to do this again. And I was very surprised, because I hadn't expected this reaction myself at all within me. And if I already feel it, first of all, I'm a woman. Secondly, I'm not really this macho, trigger-happy kind of person. I can imagine that for certain people, this hunting impulse can be very strong. And I think for Hunter, it is indeed very much connected to his masculinity, to success in life, to being used to be able to get whatever you want to have. And all these things I could explore through this character.
Maybe in the dorp, in the small village, when there are the dance and this evening session with joy, then maybe you can realize that yeah, well, actually we are friends all together. So maybe okay, it's a big word, but maybe I can join the community or something. Maybe it's an illusion, of course. I even think about that. Maybe you can do it in another way and do a kind of alternative way when this hunter changes his mind in some way.
I don't like happy endings. No, and also I didn't invent it. That's the worst. I got the idea because actually I read a story about Botswana, where an indigenous people, a San community, like the San community in this book, is driven away from their original ground. They are forced to live in a city. In 2 generations they impoverish a lot. And then and it was written with precisely these words. They are brought back to their original territory, or they're reintegrated to their original territory to help re-establish the natural equilibrium. And it's precisely the same words that we use here to talk about the reintegration of wolves, the reintegration of bears. So if we talk about people with the same words that we talk about animals, it means that we look at them as if they are animals. And if you then, in the same way, think that trophy hunting is a way that works as animal protection, which is unpleasant but partly true in our capitalist logic in African countries, you could also say development aid. Well, maybe a manhunt is a way of development aid. And that's sort of the illusion that Van Heeren, let's say the safari organizer, is actually selling to Hunter White, and Hunter White wants to believe it. So I think it's a working together of both of them. And what is the worst? I always thought that I sort of thought it up out of this analogy, but recently someone sent me an excerpt from a BBC video that until 1970, in several African countries, there were safari organizations that were actually offering this kind of a manhunt, which I found very shocking. And then there's, of course, the story of Sarajevo that came out recently, where also people paid to, in a war context, be allowed to shoot people. So I think we cannot overestimate the niceness of the human species.
So now this book is translated into many languages and appears in many countries. But of course it's not happening with everybody and with everyone these books. I know that everyone's telling us that, okay, you are so lucky, or you must pay for that or something like that, but I don't believe in that.
Well, actually I do think I was lucky, but not only, maybe. Even before I started to write a novel, I had the feeling, and it's very hard to explain why, but I had the feeling that this book would change something. Because up till then my books did all right, like books do. They were not translated, they sold okay, but not brilliantly, and they were visible, but not really visible. I mean, I was like an average writer. And when I started to pitch this story to friends, because long before I start to work on a book, I always tell the story like in a short version to 4 or 5 people that I really trust. Everybody said the same. It's a horrible story and you cannot write it. Please don't write it. Why do you have to write it? And the more resistance that I felt, the more I thought I really have to write it. Because if everybody is irritated, it touches on something that is painful. And if it's so painful, then we have to talk about it. So it really strengthened me in the idea we have to. And then shortly before it was published, my publisher said, are you sure? I mean, maybe we don't have to print it. Maybe we have to wait like 1 year, 2 years, 4 years, because it's not the right time. It's a sensitive subject. It's a very hard book. And again, I thought, I feel friction. No, we have to do it now. And I think the book came at exactly the good time. And then I was very lucky, because in Germany certain things collided in a way that you cannot possibly plan. Because Germany has hardly any colonial literature, and therefore also not so much decolonization literature. They have talked very long about World War II, then they moved on to the unification of Germany, but they had never addressed their own colonial past. And precisely at the moment that this book came out, Namibia said, maybe we have to talk. And I think for many people in the German-speaking context, Trophee became a book to talk about Namibia without saying Namibia. So it opened this debate on a subject that until then had not really been explored. Also, I was crazy enough to learn German, which made it possible to do a reading tour and to have a very direct contact with German audience. And so it picked up in Germany and it became a bestseller in Germany. And that sort of gave the book a second life in Flanders, in Holland, and also facilitated many of the other translations. Another thing is that the book was nominated for the European Prize of Literature, and that generated lots of translations in Eastern Europe, which I find very interesting because it means a small language is translated into another small language, and this exchange of European novels is something that I find really very important. We share this European literature against this big Anglo-Saxon block of what's coming to us in English. And I think that this exchange is very enriching because there is also a European way of thinking behind it, although Europe is very diverse and very differentiated, but maybe precisely that is what you could call European thinking.
And also maybe this, what you mentioned already, that it must be a nice story, a good story with a nice ending and things like that. And this...
It's definitely not a nice story, but, and I think that's important too, it's a story. And we are at a time where a lot of what's being written is autobiographical, or at least partly true. There's lots of novels which are like on the border of fiction and non-fiction. And this is really a story. And I think that one of the reasons why that works so well, and what is also the power of fiction today, is that we live in a time and in a society where we don't even agree on the facts. My facts are not your facts, and to go back to America, every two Americans have completely different facts. So it's very difficult to get in a conversation with each other, because the discussion already starts when you're discussing the facts, before you even can discuss what you think about it. The nice thing with fiction is, if it's a story, the writer decides what the facts are and says, this is the facts. And then as a reader, you can start to reflect upon it, and you can debate again, and we can have a conversation again on what do I think about it? What's my ethical view on it? What's my morality on it? What's my emotional response? And this emotional response is another thing which is very important, because we've so learned to shield ourselves, I think, against all the bad news that comes our way. I mean, we see it on television and we don't feel it. We look at it and we say, yeah, it's horrible, and then we order dessert. That's just how it is. But fiction, because of perspective and focalization, somehow still has the power to get behind this shield and to make you actually respond emotionally to things. And I think just because it's a story, maybe it's also one of the reasons why it did so well.
Okay, let's talk about the other book, the motor, no. Meisjes, Muslim and Motoren, so girls, Muslims and motors, travel guide, maybe not the guide, but a travel story with two girls go to Iran and then in other countries.
There were two reasons. There was, it a lot had to do with the media image of countries like Iran, and it was not so long after 9/11, so there was this idea that all Muslim countries were dangerous, that everything had to do with terrorism, with oppressed women, with, in any case, with bad news. And we never heard in the news these smaller stories. How many Iranian girls study at university? Or what does an Iranian woman do on a Tuesday afternoon at 4 o'clock? Or who's the boss once the front door of the house is closed? The husband or the wife? So all these backstories we never heard, and we were very curious. So what made us want to leave was curiosity. And I think also the idea that if we, being two women, could travel 30,000 kilometers through Muslim countries only, it could not be as horrible and as dangerous as we were always told. And I'm still here, so it can be so bad.
Wow, what a surprise. No, I think if you go to East, then people becomes friendly, but it's also cliché, I know.
And in any case, hospitality is a larger part of the cultural heritage and of the tradition. We have been welcomed in Iran, but also in Yemen, and also in lots of other countries in Central Asia and in the East, into people's homes. Not only for lunch or for dinner, but also to stay and to sleep. And at a certain point, we have tried to do the same in Europe. And in a country like Switzerland, it is impossible to even find a farmer who finds it okay that you put your tent on his field. So there is a different idea, and of course it's partly a religious thing, that it's a good thing to be hospitable to a guest or a traveler. But there was also, at that time, we were talking 2007, so internet was still rather new. There were some internet cafes, there were no smartphones yet, there was no Wi-Fi yet. So there was this genuine interest from both sides in cultural exchange. People wanted to talk to us because we could describe a world and experiences that they had no idea of or no image of, especially in the smaller villages. And we were interested in their life because to us it was also all new. We had left and we had no idea where we would sleep, where we would eat. There was no TripAdvisor, there was no booking, there was no... All these things were simply not there. There was not Google Maps, there was a GPS which only had white dots on a black screen, not even a map. So there were many more reasons for this cultural exchange, and I went to Pakistan and Central Asia again this summer for 3 months, and that has changed totally on both sides. The arrival of the internet and of everybody having a cell phone has completely changed this interaction between humans. I see many people who travel who are only interested in themselves and in taking the correct Instagram photo where the country that they travel through is like the decor that they stand in, but it's all about them. And I have seen many local people who have lost their interest in the visitors because they all have smartphones and they think they know what Europe looks like, and they also think that every Westerner is an influencer.
Well, at least we are discussing it. Thank you very much for the discussion.
It was a pleasure. Thank you.